Nobody at the auction barn paid her much attention at first. 14 years old, standing near the back with a small notebook tucked under her arm, most people assumed she was somebody's granddaughter waiting for a ride home. Dealers in cowboy hats and work jackets walked past without a second glance. Yes, this really happened. She really did register her own bidder number that day. And by the time the auction ended, she'd outbid every experienced dealer in that room, leaving grown men checking their own numbers twice. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. Emma had been coming to this auction barn since she was old enough to walk, trailing behind her grandfather as he inspected cattle and negotiated prices with a calm confidence that took most farmers decades to build. For years, she'd been the quiet kid sitting on a hay bale in the corner, sketching cattle in a notebook, while adults talked business over her head. Nobody expected that to change. 6 months earlier, her grandfather's heart gave out unexpectedly during morning chores. The farm, 300 acres of prime grazing land and a breeding herd he'd spent 40 years building, passed to her father on paper, but everyone in the family knew the truth. Her father worked full-time in town and had never wanted the farm. Emma was the one who'd spent every weekend since she was 7 learning bloodlines, feed ratios, and market timing at her grandfather's side. Grief hit the family hard that spring, but Emma channeled hers into something practical. While her father debated whether to sell off the herd entirely, she quietly took over the farm's daily operations. Waking up before school to handle feeding and record-keeping her grandfather had taught her by hand. Local vets and long-time farmhands who'd known her grandfather started noticing something unusual: a 14-year-old asking sharper questions about herd genetics than most adults twice her age. By late summer, she'd convinced her father to let her manage the farm's breeding program independently, using money from a small inheritance her grandfather had left specifically in her name. Most people in the family assumed it was a phase, something she'd lose interest in once school picked back up. Emma had other plans entirely. Walking into the auction barn that October morning, she wasn't there to watch. She approached the registration table, filled out the paperwork herself, and requested her own bidder number, something the clerk hesitated over briefly before her father, standing a few feet away, nodded his confirmation. A few dealers nearby exchanged amused glances, assuming this was some kind of school project or a proud father indulging his daughter. Clutching her registration card, Emma walked to a seat near the front of the barn, close enough to see every detail of the prize bull that was about to go up for auction, the exact bloodline she'd been researching for months. The one she believed could transform her grandfather's herd for the next generation. The auctioneer called the bull forward, and the barn's energy shifted immediately. This wasn't an ordinary lot. This bull carried championship bloodlines, the kind serious dealers traveled hours to bid on. 6 professional buyers sat scattered through the crowd, each representing ranches or breeding operations with far deeper pockets than a single-family farm could typically match. Bidding opened high and climbed fast. Within the first minute, 3 smaller buyers dropped out entirely, leaving the real competition among 4 seasoned dealers who bid with the practiced calm of men who'd done this hundreds of times. Nobody in that group had even glanced toward the 14-year-old sitting near the front with her notebook closed in her lap. Before we get to the moment that changed everything, hit subscribe, because what Emma did next left 4 professional dealers checking their own bidder numbers in disbelief. Her hand went up for the first time at a number that made a few heads turn. The auctioneer, slightly caught off guard, confirmed her bid aloud, and a ripple of surprised murmurs moved through the crowd. One dealer smirked, assuming she'd misunderstood the increment, and raised his own bid without hesitation, expecting her to fold immediately. She didn't fold. Her hand went up again, matching his raise without a flicker of hesitation on her face. The dealer glanced over this time, really looking at her for the first time since the bidding started. 2 more dealers dropped out as the numbers kept climbing, unwilling to compete against a level of persistence they hadn't anticipated from anyone in that seat. Whispers spread through the barn as people started paying closer attention. Farmers who'd known Emma's grandfather leaned toward each other, quietly explaining who she was and whose granddaughter she'd grown up to be. The remaining 2 dealers exchanged a brief, uncertain look, clearly recalculating whether this was a bidding war worth continuing against someone who showed no sign of backing down. The auctioneer's pace quickened as the price climbed well past what anyone expected for this lot. Emma sat perfectly still between bids, her expression calm and unreadable. giving away nothing about how far she was actually prepared to go. Her father sat a few rows back, watching his daughter hold her ground against professional buyers with decades more experience, visibly torn between concern and quiet astonishment. One more dealer dropped out, leaving a single, well-known buyer from a large regional ranch as her only remaining competition, a man who had never once, in 15 years of attending this auction, lost a bid he genuinely wanted. Raising his number again, the remaining dealer named a figure clearly meant to end things a jump large enough to make most casual bidders reconsider entirely. He didn't even look at Emma when he said it, already turning slightly toward the auctioneer as though the matter were settled. Emma's hand went up before the auctioneer finished repeating the number. An audible gasp moved through parts of the crowd. The dealer turned fully around this time, studying her with a mixture of disbelief and genuine curiosity, clearly trying to figure out whether a 14-year-old actually had the financial backing to follow through on a bid at this level. He raised once more, higher this time, testing whether she was bluffing. She wasn't. Matching his bid instantly, Emma finally spoke for the first time all morning, her voice steady despite every eye in the barn now fixed on her. "I'm not stopping," she said simply. The dealer studied her for a long moment, then slowly lowered his number card, shaking his head with what looked like reluctant respect rather than frustration. The gavel came down. Emma had won. What most people in that barn didn't know was exactly how she'd secured the money to back a bid that high. Her grandfather, anticipating she'd eventually want to take the farm's breeding program seriously, had quietly set aside an investment account in her name years earlier, money he'd built specifically from profits off his own championship bloodline sales, meant to fund exactly this kind of opportunity when she was ready. Combined with proceeds from calves she'd personally raised and sold that summer, under her own management decisions, she'd walked into that auction with real, verified financial backing most people in the room had no reason to suspect a teenager could possess. Her father later admitted he'd known about the account, but had genuinely doubted she'd use it this boldly, this soon. What he hadn't fully appreciated, until watching her hold her ground against 4 professional dealers without flinching, was just how deeply she'd absorbed everything her grandfather had spent years quietly teaching her, not just about cattle, but about knowing exactly what something was worth, and refusing to back down once you did. Walking up to complete the paperwork, Emma signed her name with the same steady hand she'd used to raise her bidder number all morning, officially becoming the owner of a bull that would reshape her family's breeding program for years to come. Applause was scattered at first, uncertain how to respond to what had just happened, then grew steadier as word spread through the barn about who Emma actually was. The dealer who'd lost the bidding war walked over afterward, extending his hand with what appeared to be genuine respect rather than resentment. He told her it had been years since anyone had pushed him that hard on a bid, and he hadn't expected it to be a 14-year-old girl with a closed notebook in her lap. Local farmers who'd known her grandfather approached throughout the rest of the afternoon, several sharing stories about the man and how visibly proud he would have been watching his granddaughter hold her own against the county's most experienced buyers. Emma's father stood back for most of it, watching his daughter field congratulations with the same calm composure she'd shown at the auction podium, quietly realizing how much he'd underestimated what she'd been building over the past 6 months. News of the auction spread through the local farming community within days, then reached a regional agricultural publication that ran a short feature on her under the headline about a teenage heir outbidding seasoned dealers. Interview requests followed, along with calls from other young farmers and 4-H members who wanted to know how she'd done it, how she'd learned enough to compete at that level, while still finishing 8th grade homework most evenings. Back home, the new bull became the cornerstone of a breeding program Emma now runs with far more authority than most people would grant a 14-year-old, though fewer people question that authority these days. Her father formally handed over daily management decisions that winter, acknowledging what had become obvious to everyone who watched that auction: she understood this farm's future better than he did, and she'd earned the right to shape it. What stays with people who witnessed that day isn't just the final bid number, it's the moment a room full of experienced dealers, initially dismissive of a quiet teenager in the back row, had to fundamentally reconsider what they thought they knew about who belonged at that auction. Emma never raised her voice, never sought attention, and never once needed to prove herself beyond simply refusing to back down when it mattered. Her grandfather's herd continues growing under her direction today, built on the same bloodline knowledge he spent a lifetime developing, now carried forward by the granddaughter everyone underestimated until the exact moment she made that impossible to do any longer. Dismissed as just a kid, Emma walked out having outbid every dealer in the room and secured her family's farming legacy. Her grandfather's quiet lessons became the confidence nobody saw coming. If this story inspired you, subscribe for more real stories of people who proved everyone wrong.